Sunshines! So for those of you who follow me on Instagram and Twitter, you already know, but starting in the beginning of spring semester, I started taking Sculpture 2. And Sculpture 2 is welding. So today I'm just going to share with you a little bit about the different methods of welding that I've learned and the different processes that we've gone through so far. So the first type of welding that we learned was just plain old gas welding with argon gas and oxygen. This type of welding is pretty basic and it involves a starter and the mixing of the gas and oxygen to create a flame, like a fire flame. Gas welding is also known as oxyacetylene welding. So gas welding is super interesting because not only is it one of the oldest forms of welding to exist, but it also requires the additive of a filler metal. So basically, you're heating up your two parts of metal, kind of like this, your sweet spot in the middle between the 2 points of metal, and you're trying to have them melt at the exact same time. And it's so fascinating because they melt and they create like a pool, and you can see it instantly. There's just like this glowing pool, and all of a sudden it's not a solid anymore, it's a liquid, and it's so cool. And as soon as that metal turns liquid like that, you add the filler. So it's a two-hand process where you're kind of heating the two metals up and then adding the filler as soon as it's hot, and then you just pull both away. And it's so fascinating. So the project that we did for the oxyacetylene welding was we did a line drawing of a classic artist's piece. So I chose a piece called Sonnens by Joan Miró, and it's really cute. I had a lot of fun with that kind of welding. The only downside to that sort of welding is because it is oxygen and gas, you have a starter that you have to start the flame with, and when you need to pause, you can't just put the torch down when it's flaming. You have to turn the torch off, pause, reset your metal, and then you have to start the flame all over again and kind of begin again. The next type of welding that we learned is MIG welding, and MIG welding is welding with electricity. MIG welding is essentially you have a torch and it has a stinger. It's really interesting with a MIG welder because you're controlling the wire speed of how quickly the stinger is coming out, and also the voltage that's going into the torch. And it's this really interesting electrical scientific thing that happens. You have to ground your welder while you're working, then the magic kind of just happens. With a MIG welder, it's not quite like gas welding. You can just put the torch down. I really like MIG welding because not only is the torch a lot lighter, but it's also way faster because you don't have to start and stop and start and stop and start and stop. The project that we're doing to practice our MIG welding and use for MIG welding is we're creating 5 different shapes: a pyramid, a square, a cylinder, a donut, and a dodecahedron, and we're using cold rolled steel. Because all of these shapes are 3D, there was a lot of math and measuring and fabricating that went into prepping all of our pieces to put them together. I definitely enjoy it a lot. It's a lot harder though because essentially you start by like tack welding your piece together, and then you go back and you run a bead, and there's a lot of sort of a circular motion and dragging motion, but the stinger touches the metal, which is different than in gas welding, and you just sort of run a bead all the way around, and you end up with this super thick seam where the two metals join. Because of that, what we end up having to do after we've welded our piece is then go back and grind away the excess. So we start by grinding with a grinding stone to get most of it down, and it just eats away at it. And then we go back with a grinding like with a sandpaper. And after all of that, once we've gotten the grind down with the sandpaper, we can go back with sort of a polishing sandpaper type thing and kind of clean up our edges. Another thing we got to learn because of the MIG welding project, and also because of the type of material we were using with our MIG welding project, is we got to learn how to use a plasma cutter. And plasma cutting is also, of course, electricity, but wow, there's a lot of slag produced by plasma cutting. Sort of like sewing, how when you sew on one side you have a really nice stitch, and on the reverse side it sometimes looks a little messier. That's sort of what it's like with plasma cutting. You cut on the side, on one side, and it's a really nice cut, and on the, well, except for mine because they're not perfect cuts. They're not very circular or anything like that, but theoretically you have a nice cut on one side, and then on the other side the slag, or kind of the drips, happen. And so you go in with a chisel and you just kind of knock the slag off and you can go about your way. There was definitely a learning curve for me, obviously with learning how the metals react to the different heats and the different way that I'm working with it, but also like the fear factor was a learning factor for me. Because when you're gas welding, like, you can be holding your piece and you can get super close. And the same with MIG welding, you can get like right in there and all these sparks that fly at you. And when you're plasma cutting the same way and when you're grinding the same way, your immediate reaction is to want to pull away or stop or not get close to it, right? But by the end of all of this, I feel super confident in the welding shop that I never thought I would be good at welding, but there you go. And it's so much fun and it's so therapeutic. It's sweat and sheer muscle. I think my arms are going to be bulging by the end of this semester. So anyway, that's sort of my experience with welding. I have been getting a few questions about like, oh wow, what's welding like? Or tell us a little bit about welding. And since the Wonderly theme of the month is share, I sort of thought this might be an appropriate time to share with you guys this new hobby that I have acquired, which is welding. So hopefully you guys found this interesting. I know that I did not speak totally scientifically to each of the welding processes, but I spoke from memory the best that I can remember, and I don't think you guys need all of the specifics, so sorry about that if you wanted all of the specifics. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!